Hey, it's Bryan here. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Go Be More podcast. For those of you who've never heard of Go Be More Apparel, I just want to take a moment to tell you what we're about. We believe we all have a responsibility to chase our dreams, and we want to give you the motivation, the mindset, and the permission to do it. We want our apparel to be a constant reminder of your commitment to achieving your goals. We want the words Go Be More to remind you of your dreams and your next steps every time you see them. As for this podcast, every Tuesday I speak with John Rankin, world-class miler, kidney disease survivor, and founder of Go Be More, about topics that will help to unlock your potential and get you moving forward. Every Friday, we interview a special guest to learn more about their Go Be More journey. In this episode, we speak with Merhawi Keflezighi, who is celebrating 15 years as president of HAWI Management, which represents numerous track and field athletes. HAWI has made a name for himself as one of the most innovative agents out there, working with numerous smaller brands to create new opportunities for his athletes. In our talk, we learn about HAWI's roots as an immigrant from Eritrea, how his experience growing up informed who he is today, and how they have shaped his beliefs about taking on risk and maintaining relationships. HAWI has a great story, and I'm happy he was willing to share it with us. Alright, on to the episode. HAWI, welcome to the Go Be More podcast.
Thank you, Bryan. Thank you so much for having me.
So happy to have you, HAWI. Thank you again for accepting the invitation and giving our audience an opportunity to hear your inspirational story and hopefully some funny stories about our time together traveling while I was competing professionally. It was a great experience, and I'm so excited to share with our audience so much of what I've learned from you, and obviously to hear it from you personally.
Thank you very much, John. We go way, way back, so I'm really looking forward to this moment of reflection for all of us.
Absolutely.
So Howie, I was hoping we could start with actually the beginning, really, for you. Just setting a tone or setting a stage for people to understand some of your background. When you were young, I don't know how old you were when you moved from Eritrea. People familiar with who've read your brother's books and stuff might know some of the story, but if you could tell some of our listeners a little bit about your background coming from Eritrea and how you ended up in California.
Yep, absolutely. So, yeah, a lot of people know some of our background because of my brother Meb and his book. But my family is originally from Eritrea, which is located in Northeast Africa, just north of Ethiopia, along the Red Sea. And so 1979 is when I was born in Eritrea. And actually, that was in the middle of a war. So from 1961 to 1991, there was a war of independence between Eritrea and Ethiopia, exactly like 30 years. And so being born in the middle of that war, my dad and my family obviously wanted Eritrean independence. My dad was very much involved in that independence movement as a civilian. And because of his involvement in that independence movement, he was a wanted man. He was a targeted man. And so it was just my dad actually had to leave. We were in the capital city of Eritrea. The city is called Asmara, and that's where we lived. And my dad had a very successful grocery store there. But because that he was a wanted man, he had to move the whole family into a village, which is further away from the city, where he could have a little bit more security for his own life. And so we went to my mom's village called Adibeyani, and that's where my dad went from being a city boy and having his own grocery store to a farmer. And one of the things about my dad is he's just such a hard worker, and he succeeded as a farmer also. But that's the main reason we were out there, is just to kind of be safe. And after a while, my mom finally said, all right, you're still a wanted man. You might be a little bit more safe here, but ultimately, they're after you and you're either going to be arrested or killed. And so do what a lot of others are doing. Leave the country and, we can't afford to go with you, but you go ahead and kind of pave the road for us so we can join you wherever you land. And so it wasn't my dad's idea to go. He would never leave his family in that condition during the war. But my mom said, you're not going to do us any good if you're arrested or killed. And so she pushed him to take this courageous, brave step. And my dad made sure he got permission and the blessing of his father-in-law. And once he got that, it was sad. It was very difficult for him to leave his wife and 5 kids. And my mom was actually pregnant with their 6th child.
But Howie, can I ask you real quick, how old were you when this happened?
Yeah, so this was about 19 1981
Okay, so you were
that my
little.
dad left.
Yep.
So I was like 2 or 3 years old,
Yep.
very young.
Wow.
Yeah, I was super young. And so luckily, most of these stories, it took us 5 years later before we left the country. So we were separated from my dad for 5 years. And my mom, she was the mother and father of the household. And she just did an amazing job providing for her family. And what she did is she actually moved. So after my dad took a trip from Eritrea to Sudan on foot, which was over 225 miles on foot.
That's amazing.
About 7 days. Yeah.
Man.
And this is actually the trek and journey of a lot of Eritreans that left the country.
Yeah.
And some kids had to join their parents. Luckily for our family, my dad did that on his own and paved the road for us to join him down the line. But a lot of friends that I have, they had to make that journey with their mom and dad. And I can't imagine. That is just, my dad tells me the stories that he went through, and I can't imagine doing that with a family, and especially with young people. But my dad and mom, there was no way they would put us through that. But my dad made the journey so that he could kind of pave the road. So he went to Sudan, start working immediately there, try to save some money. And he was fortunate enough to actually make it to Italy after about 2 years in Sudan, and was working really hard. And one of the most amazing stories in Italy is that my dad became really good friends with his boss, which was like the president of the company where he worked at. And my dad spoke Italian and worked really hard because he was driven. He had a mission and an objective, which was to save as much money as possible so he can bring his wife and his kids. Yeah. He worked so hard and so diligently. His boss said, why do you work so hard? And once they got to know each other, my dad said, well, I'm trying to save my family. And he got comfortable enough where he asked his boss if he could advance him some money, let him borrow some money, because my older siblings were getting to the age where they would be drafted into the military. And my dad was getting really nervous about that. And at that time, his boss was amazing. He says, how much is it going to take? And my dad said, it's going to take the equivalent of $6,000 at that time in 1986 or so. And the boss said, is this for one person or for everybody? And my dad said, it's for everybody. I've been saving money. And if you can give me $6,000 as a loan, then I can bring everybody to Italy. And his boss said, come back in a few days, and gave him the money and said, this is not a loan, it's a gift.
Wow.
And get out of here.
Yeah. And so that's really how we were able to get from Eritrea through my dad's hard work, my mom's just faith, and, meet up in Italy. And so that was our first stepping stone before we came to the United States in 1987. So we lived in Italy for a year and a half before we moved to San Diego, California.
Do you have any memories of that time in Italy, just out of curiosity?
In Italy, I do have just snippets of memories, right? Because I think I was so young and moving so 3 different continents in the first maybe 8 years of my life, that, there isn't that stability where you kind of have something to draw upon. So I definitely, remember more of Italy than Eritrea. Yeah, but most of my real memories or vivid memories are from the United States in San Diego.
Just for my curiosity, because I lived in Italy for a year and a half, I'm curious, where were you in Italy when you were there?
We were in Milano.
Oh, you're in Milan. Okay, great.
Milan.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. So, and the amazing thing is at that age, I picked up Italian very quickly, me and my younger brother, right? We picked it up so quickly. We started forgetting our native language of Tigrinya. And then when we came to the United States, we learned English very quickly. We forgot our Italian. And thankfully, because my mom and dad spoke Tigrinya at home, we were able to pick that up. So I can still say I'm bilingual.
Well, it's exactly the story that happened with my daughters. Actually, they were about the same age when we moved there, and they picked up Italian within a few months. They were just talking with their friends and playing, and it was very natural. And then it got to a point where their Italian was probably almost as good as their English, and better than their Japanese, because my wife is Japanese and speaks to them mostly in Japanese. But now we've been away for a year and a half, and I feel like they've forgotten their Italian, and if you don't use it, I think if they ever study it again, they'll probably pick it up more quickly. But it mirrors everything you said, what I've seen with my daughters and how they've experienced that learning a new language, how quickly and it came and then sort of went,
Yeah. Like anything in life, easy come, easy go.
That's right.
Well, Howie, hearing you tell the story about your father and your mother's strength of character, from my experience with your family and with Meb and obviously spending so much time being around you, for sure, I'll say that it's very clear that that character is in all of you. You know, your siblings and extended family. A lot of your family that I've gotten to be around and get to know. It's very clear that that is a part of the collective whole of your family. And I'm just curious, like for you, like when I was around you and you were just growing, HAWI Management, how much of that were you aware of in terms of like the kind of person that you are and how you carried yourself in building the agency that you now have?
Yeah, it's really sometimes it's everything in hindsight is more clear. So I think growing up, I think our family is definitely filled with love, especially being separated from our father for 5 years. Once we all got together, my dad was trying to make up for lost time with all of us. And, it was strict, right? We were expected to take advantage of all the opportunities in the United States. He made a lot of sacrifices, and so did our mom. They were away from all of their siblings and all of their cousins, right? And so to come all the way to the United States, if we didn't take advantage of those opportunities, it would be like almost a waste of all the sacrifices that they made. So we tried to make the most of the opportunities that they presented for us through all their sacrifice. And my dad really, it wasn't like recognize it. It was, he lectured us.
Right.
It was it was, you have opportunities that I didn't have, that your mom didn't have, that your cousins back in Eritrea don't have, that your uncles and aunts don't have. Don't waste this opportunity, and don't only use it for yourself, but also, you're expected to help your family back in Eritrea. Those didn't have the opportunities you have. And I think learning that and instilling in that in us at a young age was important, because it's one thing to make a living and support yourself. That's success in itself. But when you have a bigger goal and a bigger objective, then it drives you a little bit more. And I think that has definitely helped us have a bigger vision than just ourselves in our upbringing in the United States.
Are you the same way with your kids?
I try, right? So I wish, we're definitely more lenient on our kids than my parents were on me and us. So our son is 7 years old and our daughter is 5 years old. And seriously, I used to think parenting was easy. I used to watch my siblings, deal with their kids, and they do a great job, of course. But you always say like, oh yeah, when I'm a parent, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to allow my kids to do X, Y, and Z. And then they have you wrapped around their finger, which is my case.
Yep.
My wife.
No,
yeah.
that's for all of us, Howard. That's for all of us.
Yep.
We can all attest to that. Yeah.
So my wife is a lot more strict, and she knows how to show that tough love a lot better than I can. And I'm, obviously we don't take it too far, but I'll tell you guys a funny story with our daughter. When she was getting potty trained, she would have some accidents, and I would say like, I'd be disappointed. I'm like, come on, you can do it. And I'd say, all right, Miss Ghana, I love you, but I'm not happy with you, right? Just so she understands, I'm not happy with you right now, but I love you unconditionally. And then when she does have an accident again, she would go, but you still love me, right? And I'm like, yes, no doubt. But, so, it's just really tough, like to have that balance,
yes.
Right? That tough love, but the unconditional love at the same time. And hopefully over the years, I'm probably a little bit more lenient than some other parents, but I just want our kids to know that I love them unconditionally. And I think it's good when you have a balance, between mother and father. One can be the bad cop, one can be the good cop. And my wife hates it that I'm always trying to be the good cop. But
Well, I tell you, my parents used to say right before we got that butt whooping, I'm doing this because I love you.
Exactly.
They would say that all the time, and I'm like, if you love me, don't do it. But no, I think that as parents, because I have a little 4-year-old girl and 2 other teenagers that are like my stepkids and everything that I've known for almost 10 years now. I feel like that's the greatest thing you do in terms of showing them that you love them is to be honest with them, and to show them how to be vulnerable, to make hard decisions, like to just show them the challenging things, to show them the honest things. Don't paint a picture of a world where somebody doesn't get mad when something is wrong, or somebody doesn't do something right when things are challenging. You have to be the example so that, because that's what they're really going to pick up is they honestly don't do what you say. They do what you do, you know? And so if your actions truly are the kinds of actions that you would want them to take later on in life when they start to make decisions or put in positions where they have to make decisions, I think in many ways, just like your mother and father's example, your dad and mom may have verbalized it, probably your dad more than your mom, but even though he's verbalizing it, he's just stating it and putting it out there so that you hear it. But I guarantee you his example was probably what you guys were looking at the most in terms of how he responded to things, how he spoke to people, how he executed things, how he sought things through, how he had the goals that he had.
Right?
I have no
how
doubt.
hard he worked and how much he was willing to sacrifice.
I have no doubt.
Things.
Yep.
Exactly. So I have no doubt that his example carried way more weight than anything that he said, but what he said had even greater weight because he actually did what he said.
That's a great point, John, especially with my dad. When we first came to the United States, he would wake up the older kids. So luckily I was exempt from it because I was so young, but my sister Bahagi, Meb, AK, and Futsum, my older siblings that were like in the end of elementary school and into middle school, he would wake them up at 4:30 in the morning and he would learn English from the dictionary before school. And that was just one of those things, like he was learning himself. It wasn't like, okay, you guys make sure you get up at 4:30 and study the dictionary. He was there with them, learning along with them. And I think that dedication and example goes a long way, you know? And so, and then that was to the point where he knew more English than all of us when we first came to the United States, but he put us in a position where we were able to learn much more than he was because of how young we were when we arrived in the United States.
You know what stands out, and I think you touched on a little bit with what you were talking about with your kids is the expectations you set for your kids, and even more than that, the routines and the habits and the processes or whatever, however you manage your house, you know, like those set a baseline expectation for what's okay and what's not okay. And if you're consistent with those and you set those routines, they have a huge impact on the way your kids like internalize what's the right way to behave. Right. And it's hard though. It's like, you know, just to use an example in our house, it's like we had examples of how much we allowed kids to watch TV, for example. And now with the coronavirus thing and there's less school and they're getting to watch a little bit more than they used to and stuff like this. So things change and shift with the situation, but we try to be like really think about it and say, well, what is the right amount that we feel comfortable with? And let's, even if that's difficult to do, let's figure out how to do it because we think that's the right amount. Right. And that sounds like that's how your dad approached everything with you guys. This is the way we need to do this. And I'm going to set the example and I'm going to hold you to it. We're going to make this a routine and we're going to do it.
Yep. And I think when there's accountability, right? So it's one thing to lecture and state this is what you should do. But if you're not held accountable for doing it or not doing it, then it's easy to say like, oh yeah, what you say doesn't matter because you can do something else. And I think my dad, he was definitely like, if he said something, he meant for you to understand it and execute. And he would always say like, hey, we all make mistakes. It's only making the same mistake twice. That's the problem. One mistake, we all make it. And I think that was a great teaching. And then I think even you mentioned, Brian, in this coronavirus moment that we're all in, me and my wife, we had to kind of look in the mirror and say like, hey, you know, things are slower now. We're both self-employed and things are a little slower than usual, but we're still not accomplishing all of our goals, right? In terms of structure at home and things like that. And it's easy to say, oh, we're busy and that's why we didn't get around to doing X, Y, and Z. But then sometimes it's good for us to realize, you know what, busy is just an excuse. It could be a valid portion of the excuse, but sometimes you can have all the time in the world and sometimes you're just not as disciplined or you're just not as committed. And so I think that's one thing that it's important to realize your strengths and weaknesses. And sometimes there's things that hide our strengths and weaknesses. And sometimes when that veil is lifted, you have to deal with the truth. And I think it's okay, like to recognize and admit your weaknesses in certain areas.
I love that you say that because I started realizing at some point that the thing that holds all of us back the most isn't really anything outside of ourselves. Mm-hmm. It's ourselves. You know, we are our greatest obstacle, and understanding why that's the case is in recognizing that is honestly, I think, the greatest challenge for every human being is being able to be honest enough with yourself to say, it is up to me. It is my responsibility when it works out to make it work out. And it's also my fault if it doesn't, you know? And what that really means is that we make more excuses, even when they are invalid, we accept them is the problem. You know, you may say that you don't have time, but it's amazing how you can find time to surf the internet, you know, and get on social media. And I know social media is a time suck, and it's not that it's bad, but if you can't have the self-discipline. And Will Smith said this wonderful thing, you know, on one of his like little home videos that he does on his phone. He posts everywhere. He does this little talks and stuff, or big talks, because it's Will Smith, so everything's big with Will Smith. But you know, I feel like he doesn't do anything small. It's just crazy. So he got up there and he gets his phone and he's filming his stuff, and he said this amazing thing that I cannot let go of. And he said self-discipline is self-love. So if you're not willing to be disciplined enough to work through the things that are valid excuses, that might be valid, but the fact that you're accepting it and allowing it to hold you back is the problem. You know,
Yep.
You might not have time, but you have to find a way to make the time, you know, and every excuse is still an excuse,
Yep.
valid or not. And that's what you have to be able to fight to see and recognize, so that you can stop allowing that excuse to be something that you accept and ultimately be the thing that holds you back. Because, you know, you can overcome anything, including a limit in time. And I think the way that you said it, I'm not doing it any justice. You said it perfectly. It's very, 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 very well said.
Yeah, no, thanks, John. Thanks. It's always holding yourself accountable, I think, is important, and having others help hold you accountable too. And I think that's why, you know, kind of me and Mikal coming to that term and that understanding is really helpful, because it's like, you know, if Mikal realizes it and doesn't share that with me, or I realize it and I don't share it with her, then we're still not on the same page. And I think sometimes whatever relationship that is, whether you're business partners or coach and athlete or teammates, anytime you can have that clear communication just to make sure everybody's on the same page, is that sometimes that's just stating the obvious, right? Something you recognize, and then it's beautiful when both of you recognize it, or a whole team recognizes it at the same time, because then you're like, okay, what needed to be said has been said, and we can move from here.
Yeah, it's those unspoken things that can really hold you back.
Yep, exactly.
So Howie, we covered your background getting to San Diego. I first met you at UCLA, right? And you know, your brother went to UCLA. I was on the track team with him for 1 year. He was older than me, so he graduated, but he was still there around training, living. One of the things I think is just really interesting is that you were a manager for the UCLA basketball team. So you went on to UCLA, you got your degree and law degree, but there's a unique experience working with future pro athletes who are like on the cusp of fame. Even some of them were probably famous. I don't remember exactly who was on the team then, but can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah. So basically at that time in 1998, fall of 1998, when I went to UCLA as a freshman, my sister was probably a junior there, and Meb was a fifth year senior, right?
Okay.
He had finished his eligibility. He was finishing up his degree, his specialty in business, and my sister was at school there. And it was really like, I was familiar with UCLA because I used to always come to track meets and things like that, and my sister. So I really was so fortunate to have a big support group when I came to UCLA, between my sister and her friends, my brother and his friends and his teammates. And I really, the first year at UCLA, I didn't work with the UCLA basketball team. So I was just a student, but the UCLA track team really I felt like an honorary member of the track and field team, just because, you know, I knew all of you guys, you know, later on in the years, but just all of Meb's teammates that I had watched compete, you know, I became good friends with the track team. And so that was really special for me. It was because UCLA, as you guys know, is huge, right? There's so many students. Right. It's a big campus. And so to have like a smaller unit to be associated with is really good. And so the UCLA track and cross country program was always felt like home to me, and I was never good enough to be on the team, but it was just good to be a part of that team in just from a friendship standpoint.
Right.
And so after my first year, what happened is Meb knew I loved basketball. That was my first love. That was the sport like Jon, that I just grew up wanting to be in the NBA at some point. And luckily, my hoop dreams finished in the ninth grade when I didn't make the JV team. I knew like I had to really get serious and buckle down and focus on my academics. But I still love the game of basketball. And so Meb understood. He heard somewhere that basketball managers, student managers on the UCLA basketball team get scholarships. And he said, well, you're already at UCLA. You're taking out loans. You're making ends meet, working just to pay for your education, unlike Meb, who had a full ride. But this is the beautiful thing about Meb. He realized he had that privilege that he earned, of course, and recognized I didn't have that, full paid education, and that I was working to make ends meet and taking out loans. And he wanted to help me find a way to make it a little bit easier for me to pay for my education and not take out as many loans. And he knew I was passionate about basketball, so he put in a good word for me with the UCLA basketball office and had me work some UCLA camps the summer after my first year at UCLA. I hit it off with Doug Erickson, who was my boss there, and I started working as a student manager for the UCLA basketball team as a sophomore at UCLA, and it was a great experience. And I loved being around athletes up to that point. Obviously, I had been around a lot of Meb's friends and teammates, but then being so close and working so closely with the UCLA basketball team and coaches really kind of sparked something where I said, you know what, I would love to represent athletes. This is some people that are managers, they want to be coaches, some want to be administrators. For me, that experience, I wanted to be an athlete advocate. And so it was so funny because I was, as a student manager, we had a staff of 6 student managers, and you're usually the first one into practice to get everything ready for practice. And sometimes you're the last one out, after the last player has, finished with practice, is ready to leave. And so one time I was in the locker room, and Earl Watson, who ended up being an amazing NBA player, he was, the last one in the locker room. And he said, Howie, why are you here wiping sweat from the ground, picking up laundry? Like, you can do so much more. And I said, hey, I'm just paying my dues. Eventually, I want to work with athletes in some capacity, and I'm just paying my dues right now. And he says, you know what? I'd work with you, right? And that little comment really sparked further my interest in working with athletes.
Wow.
Just that I had impressed somebody enough for him to say, like, hey, I'd work with you down the line. And it wasn't a commitment or anything like that, but it was just an acknowledgement that meant a lot to me. And so when I finally, because of that, I was really interested in being an agent for the basketball players, right? That was kind of like what led me to go to law school. And as you guys know, in LA, everybody wants to be in entertainment and sports.
Yep.
And I felt if I went to law school, it would distinguish me a little bit from the competition, right? At least give me a little bit more credentials. And still, that was with the mentality of being an agent for NBA players. But when I was in law school, it was a challenge, to be honest with you. It was a humbling experience being in law school. But I took a sports law clinic, and we did some projects with the LA Lakers and really built up my confidence. And then around my second year in law school is when Meb won the silver medal in the Olympics in Athens. And at that time, between the confidence I was getting from the classes and Meb's, stature in the sport rising, I said, maybe I need to pivot. And instead of going into the world of basketball, which is really cutthroat and really hard to get in, even with some of the connections that I had, maybe I could work with Meb and get in on the ground floor of a growing sport, what I thought would be a growing sport. And I think I took, for running for granted for a lot of my life because it was always around me and I was always around it. But when Meb achieved that goal and I realized like there were a lot of opportunities that he could take advantage of, is when I finally had the guts to say, hey, Meb, maybe we can work together. And that was 15 years ago when I started. At least I proposed to Meb that we work together.
So, there's two things that you said that really stand out to me. One is Earl Watson's comment to you, because I have had multiple times in my life where somebody said a comment to me that they might have just honestly, they might never have even thought twice about it again. They said it offhand. Yeah. It wasn't even a big deal to them. And yet it really resonated with me and gave me a lot of confidence. And I think it's so important. I try to remember this when somebody's doing something or struggling, or you really appreciate what they're doing in the work and trying to make an extra effort to just say, hey, like, I really appreciate what you're doing. I think you're doing a great job, because you never know if that comment might be sort of heard and let go, or it might be really held on to for a long time by somebody.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But the second thing is, I looked this up because one of the things before our interview, I said to myself, I don't know anything. Like, Meb was already a successful athlete before you started your business, and then I started thinking, well, who was Meb's agent before he worked with Howie? I've only known Meb as working with you, really. And I was like, wait,
Yeah.
Meb had like the biggest agent in the world before he worked with Howie. So then I find this really fascinating, like Meb's went from Joe's Herman's, if I read it correctly, to you.
Yes.
And then the little bit I found online reading about it was that actually it wasn't a cut and dry thing. Like Meb kind of took a long time to make that decision and really sort of, it wasn't, oh yeah, he's my brother, I'm just going to work with him. It was kind of like, you gotta prove to me that you're the right choice.
Yeah. It was, Meb is not an emotional decision maker. He's very thorough and very strategic in terms of his reasoning, right? He always makes a list. Anytime there's a tough decision to be made, it's always listing pros and cons. And that's what he always recommends to anybody, like put it out there, put your thoughts on paper and weigh those things. And Meb actually a few years ago when he was moving to San Diego from Mammoth, found that list of pros and cons that he made for whether he should hire me or not and sent it over to me. And yeah, he did. And, it's in hindsight, it's like, oh yeah, like great decision. I think we both had a lot of success. But in that moment, it was a big decision, But what made it a little easier is Jos Herman, amazing agent. What he's done for Haile Gebrselassie and Eliud Kipchoge, for example, amazing, right? He is one of the best in our sport. But he was based in Europe, and I don't think he fully appreciated what it meant for an American athlete to win a silver medal in the marathon in 2004, because he's used to having a lot of athletes win medals left and right. For me, I wanted to really capitalize on that and what that meant here in the United States. And so I think for Meb, he decided, okay, you know what? It's great to have a big agent, but let's see if we can find somebody in the United States. And initially, it wasn't even like hire me. I was like, okay, Meb, let me review your contracts and let me help you find somebody in the United States that could be a good fit. And after we did our due diligence, and there were a couple of good prospects, but ultimately, I threw my hat in there also and said, hey, and another option is me. And Meb took his time because at that time, I'm his little brother, we're best friends, but there were still a lot of unknowns. And I respect Meb for taking his time. And right when I was ready to just say, like, Meb, don't worry. I just wanted to throw my hat in there. It's no problem. Thanks for your consideration. Like right when I was ready to give up on that pursuit, Meb was like, let's do this,
Wow.
And Meb is slow to commit, but once he commits, like he can go through any storm and he's fully committed. And so that's been our experience, how he made that decision then and how we've been able to work together very successfully over the last 15 years.
As far as like being his brother, would you say it's been something that has made it an even sweeter relationship beyond being brothers? Because it's hard to imagine having a deeper connection to somebody when you're already blood related, right? But I think that when you go on an adventure, like this venture that you guys embarked upon as brothers, and this is not like something you're doing quietly behind the scenes. This is in the public eye. You guys you've done it with pretty much, you've connected with just about, as big a name as you could think of. Meb's gone to the White House and I'm pretty sure you guys have connected in some way, shape, or form with the Obamas. And I remember one recently, a couple years ago, when Meb had won Boston, I think he was on on with Ryan Seacrest on his radio show and all this stuff. You guys have truly accomplished a lot together as business partners, as manager and client, but you're still brothers. And that relationship is very special. I have a younger brother and we're working on stuff. He's a big reason why Go Be More ever even survived, just from being an idea and is becoming something so much more than that. What has this done for your relationship with your brother?
Yeah. So, it makes the victories that much sweeter, but it also makes the challenges that much tougher, right? So that's been the journey. And so you have to kind of see the upside opportunities of when Meb won the Boston Marathon, I knew what he had gone through. And so that just made that moment that much more special. But when he is injured, knowing how hard he worked and not being able to make the Olympic team in 2008, for example, that hurts, right? I wasn't hurt for myself because I was just starting in the industry. But for Meb, that was supposed to be his peak, or what we thought would be his peak. And for him not to make that team and all the, difficulties that he experienced, that day, it just made it that much tougher. But I think it's something that I've learned is just when you go on that journey, if you stick together, right, through the thick and thin, it just makes the relationship that much stronger, right? And I think that's what I'm really thankful to Meb for. And, maybe another agent, when Meb wasn't having his great years, would have said, hey, it's time for me to move on. But I think I always looked out for Meb's best interest, period. And it's really helped me in my agency because I realized, like, if you as an agent look out for the best interest of your client, you win, period, right? Because I think if you're looking at it from your best interest, then you're doing a disservice to your client, and ultimately that reputation will reveal itself. And I think that's one thing I've learned from working with Meb is look out for the client. Whether it's your brother or not, your client, you have a responsibility and a duty. And I've always been rewarded for looking for the best interest of my clients, from Meb on down to, the current clients that I have on my roster.
There's a couple things. One of the things that stands out to me is you've had a number of instances, and one of them involves Jon, where you've been negotiating with big brands, and these are Nikes and the big shoe companies, and these are the people who really fund athletes' lives. To be honest, like more than fees you win for winning races and other stuff. It's the sponsorship deals that make athletes able to train the way they do, and yet you've had a number of instances where you've been able to walk away from contracts that have been offered or enter into, I would say, sort of disputes over contract terms and stuff because it was in the best interest of your clients. And I wonder what goes through your mind when you're doing that. These companies are really big and have a lot of power and control over the sport, and yet sometimes the best interest of the client is not to work under the terms being proposed, right? And trying to navigate that situation and deciding when do you push back? How far do you go with it? I'm curious how you think about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one thing for the agent to give advice and guidance, but at the end of the day, every athlete and client has a different risk tolerance, right?
Yeah.
And so, you don't want to force any agenda that you have on your client if that's not in their best interest. So I think first and foremost, it's important that you have your client on your side or you're on their side, right? And make sure you're on the same page and you're going to go through it through thick and thin, right? You're not going to leave your client hanging. Your client's not going to leave you hanging. And that is, it's a deeper bond than just a traditional representation, right? You really have to have a lot of faith in one another to take those risks. It's calculated risks. And I think I really believe in full disclosure, right? So I think it's very important that there's good communication and the client knows, hey, this is what we're up against, right? There's a lot of risk. And as long as you know it's a calculated risk and you're aware, and also, hey, this is the plan, this is the strategy. Now, if at any point you don't feel comfortable, let me know, right? Because sometimes in theory, it's like, okay, yeah, let's go, let's do it. And then a month down the line, you're like, uh-oh, I need that paycheck. Or, the things can change really quickly. And I think if your interest is what's best for the client, then you're willing to do what's right for them at every step of the way, right? And also just having that good communication. I think communication is the key to being able to take those risks and succeed and prevail. And you don't always win. Sometimes you lose. Sometimes it doesn't work out as quickly as you want. But as long as you're taking like a measured approach and calculated risk, and you're really passionate about what you're doing, right? Because I think it's easy if you're not really committed to be on the fence. And then when things get tough, you're like, okay, I give up. But, when you're doing things for the right reasons, and I really believe, like, if you have a pure intent and you're doing things for the right reason, it doesn't matter how big the adversary or the opposition or the challenge. My dad has taught me, truth always prevails, right? And I believe in that wholeheartedly. And it's been the case in my life, right? And I really think, like, my roots in Eritrea kind of helped with that because that was a 30-year war. The population of Ethiopia at that time was 80 million, I believe. The population of Eritrea was 3 million. And so over 30 years, this tiny country with such a small population and was going against a bigger country that was getting support from the Soviet Union and from the United States. And so my dad always taught us that, like, it's like David and Goliath, right? You can overcome as long as you're doing the right things. And of course, right is a matter of perspective, but I think if you're pure in your interests and your goals, and you're willing to fight the battle, not just for the sake of fighting, but for a purpose, you prevail, or at least you honor yourself in the challenge just by doing what you think is right.
Well, and I think there's another part that you can agree or disagree with this, but it feels like, sometimes you don't exactly have the entire final plan, but there's a certain amount of faith in that if this doesn't work out, there will still be options, and we will still figure out something that works well, yes. Right? Because yep. I think of Meb leaving Nike. I don't know the whole situation, but there's one thing to say we're going to leave Nike if you already have the contract in hand from somebody else, and there's another thing to leave and say it's fine. It might take some time, but we're going to go figure out. We're going to go find somebody else. We're going to go find something different, and it might even be better. And let's have faith that there's opportunity, even if it's not clear right now.
Yeah, and sometimes the biggest risks lead to the biggest rewards, right? And you don't want to take a big risk just because there's a possibility of a huge reward. But if you're really like doing your due diligence, right? So for me, in Meb's situation, he lost his footwear sponsor, right? In that situation, but he still had Generation UCAN, Power Bar, and Sony that had come on board. So he had a more diversified portfolio, and we weren't looking to lose a category of sponsorship. We were hoping to supplement it. So at least there was a little bit of support there. And ultimately we were getting close to the new Olympic cycle, right? So we were getting close to 2012. So we knew that as long as Meb could perform, as you get closer to the Olympic trials, there's more interest. But that was at the end of 2010. So there were still 2 years that you have to figure things out. But I do think you're right. Like sometimes it's not about having the master plan, right? If you wholeheartedly think you're doing the right thing, you just pursue it, you do the best you can. And then also you avoid the nuclear option as much as possible, right? Like, you don't want to burn bridges, right? At the end of the day, like obviously you cannot control how other people react, but that's one thing I've learned from a lot of lawyers. I went to law school and I have a lot of mentors that are lawyers. When I call them for advice and it could be adversarial, they say, look, like there's one thing, like what happens in the courtroom is one thing, but the cost and the stress and the time that it takes to go through that process is usually not worth it. And these are trusted, amazing lawyers that are telling me this advice. And so usually it's like, hey, have a conversation, have a talk.
I couldn't agree with you more, Howie.
Yeah.
That's very cool to hear that individuals in that type of position and profession would state something like that. And I think more people need to hear that. You do have to weigh, like, even if the decision seems like it's the right decision in terms of whatever it is, like fighting for something, saying no to something, even if it's the right thing, you have to understand more than just making the decision. What's the consequence and the outcome of that decision? Not just the immediate, but the long term as well, and what ripple effect they're gonna be. And so when you describe that, I think that's actually a very important thing for people to hear. So I'm really glad that you shared that and kind of like that you actually had that validated by a lot of other professionals from a legal standpoint.
Yeah, and I think also sometimes people see me or some things I've done like, oh, Howie's up for a fight. And I'm like the most easily-going person, as you guys know, right? You just choose.
Yeah, you're as nice as they come, man. Seriously.
Yeah. So it's, really like pick your battles at the end of the day, right? And if you're fighting every little battle that comes your way, then you lose credibility. I remember we've talked about this, John, before, in fairy tales and things like that, like the man or the boy that cried wolf, right? So if you're always like fighting for everything, every little thing, then it's kind of, you lose credibility. So for me, I try to be in a position and I try to tell our clients, even when we're just having regular negotiations, like, hey, let's play the long game. It's okay to take a little less here, right? As long as we are building a relationship, building a bond. It's not about nickel and diming the people that you're negotiating with. So that's a important lesson that I've learned over the years. And, just be very selective and try to, don't fight just for the sake of fighting. It doesn't do anybody.
It's the key thing is you said it's about, or what I think, what I'm gathering you're saying is that it's about relationships.
Yep.
At the end of the day, we're all human beings. We're all trying to do our best. No matter where anybody's coming from, you don't really know sometimes what their true intentions are, but you have to just work from what you know for yourself and is right and what's true, and also ultimately what's going to matter the most at the end of the day. And it's relationships, building relationships, and just knowing when to walk away in order to preserve the opportunity to do more in the future. And I think that philosophy of yours, if I'm stating it correctly, is why you've been so successful.
Yeah, no, thanks, John. It's really, there's obviously things that we learn over the years and through experiences, but I think at this stage, I think I have a better perspective on all those things. Sometimes you take those battles a little bit more personally, as young athletes or as young agents. But I think over the years, I've learned like, hey, it's not personal, it's business. And you've got to be able to say, all right, didn't work out, you move on. And so it doesn't mean you don't care, but at the same time, you have to be able to move on. And I think having a lot of athletes helps me, make sure we have a balanced approach and make sure that we're looking out for the best interests of the clients at all times. And yeah, so well said, John.
So, Howie, I have a question. You're at 15 years now, so you've been doing this for a long time, and now you've grown your business. But I was looking, and to be honest, you have fewer clients than I probably expected when I was looking through, and it seems to be sort of a conscious choice. I'm curious about your philosophy that you've taken in terms of how you choose to grow your business, who you choose to work with, what you prioritize right now at 15 years. What's gotten you here, and where you plan to go?
Yeah. So it's really, as I mentioned earlier, when I started working with Meb, it was more about me thinking about like, I want to take care of my big brother. He has this short window, and we never thought it'd go until the end of 2017. Like, that was not expected. I thought, hey, another Olympic cycle or two. And what can I do to help him maximize on this Olympic medal and everything else around the peak of his career? That was my goal. And I was like, yeah, I'll get paid along the way because I know he's making some money. But it wasn't, like, let me go work for a law firm and make big money. It's probably, I was making a lot less at the start of HAWI Management, but I was so passionate about it. And it's interesting because when I was in law school, we had so many alumni come back to the law school and say, oh my goodness, don't work for a firm, don't go that route. And we all heard these horror stories, me and my classmates, and 99% of the classmates went that route. And of course, you got student loans to pay for, the pay is pretty good, but I just learned law school is a challenge for me. And I said, I'm never going to do something I don't love ever again. Right. Like, so that, because law school was 3 years and you're done. But with a job, it's hard to see the finish line. So I really committed to myself, like, hey, I'm going to do what I love. Sorry to go back to like my dad and my parents, but my dad drove a cab, right? Because that's all he could do. Coming to the United States with limited English, over the age of 50, he drove a cab, he cleaned banks, he did all these things because that's all he could do to make a living, and also supported by, public assistance, government assistance. But he worked and sacrificed so we could choose to do what we love and make a better living to support ourselves and our families. So I said, all right, I'm going to do what I love. And luckily, there's definitely a roller coaster in that 15-year journey, but I'm so glad I took that leap to say, I want to do something I'm passionate about. Because I think, as we all know, when you're passionate about something, you can work harder, you can sustain it longer. And it doesn't mean just because you're passionate, you're passionate and okay with every aspect of your job. There's parts of my job that I don't necessarily enjoy, but, like, I don't think there's any job out there that's, 110% exactly, composed of everything that you want to do. But just going back to what you said in terms of the development of HAWI Management, the agency, I mean, when I first started working with Meb, within a month or two, I started working with Jon. And the initial plan, Jon knows this, was when I proposed to Meb, I was like, Meb, I'm only going to work with you. I'm going to finish up my third year in law school and work with you. I might even take a year off and just work with you. And Meb and Jon said, no, we want you to finish up your third year in law school. Like, we'll be patient with you, finish up your degree, and then we can kind of accelerate the pace of, the management. And I am so thankful to Meb and to John for really making me do that, because I was looking for a way out, just to take a year off, just to take a year off and do something I was really passionate about. But it's hard to go back, once you leave. So I still thank you.
That was crazy, because I do remember that, and I think that's why you bring that out in people, Howie, by the way. You made me such a better person and a better athlete, a better everything, because you have that in you. And that's why I like to really celebrate your father and your mother and what was in them, because, what was in them, they instilled in you guys as well. And that way you guys could embody that same character. And you give that to your I know it, because you look at the roster of clients that you have, and from day one, you didn't mince words. You said it, like, I'm going to work with people that I know that share the same outlook and philosophy in terms of how they want to approach things with integrity.
Yep.
That's what HAWI Management stands for. HAWI, H-A-W-I, is handling adversity with integrity. That's what your management is. It's not just a name. It's a way of life. It's a way of approaching relationships and business opportunities. And, I think that when we talked about your situation with finishing the degree, there wasn't even a question. I was like, you have to do it. Like, that's just silly. We have all this time in front of us to do all this other stuff, but this is something that you just got to finish what you started. So no, I was really happy that Meb and I were saying it, or at least reinforcing maybe a thought or idea that you had yourself, but because I don't think you would have done it even if everybody else was saying it, if you didn't really want to do it too, if you didn't feel like it was right. But it was just like, we just wanted, if anything, hopefully we just validated that for you.
Yeah, no, it's always good pressure to have, right? That's why it's good to have a coach or a mentor. Sometimes we're looking for the easy way out, right? And I would have valued a reset, just to take a break from law school and focus on the business side. But at the same time, like you said, John, like, we had such a long future ahead of us, as you guys as athletes and me as an agent. It's like, okay, let's be patient. It's really 9 months.
Yep.
That school year is very short. And for you guys to really stress that and say that's a priority for us, because I was overwhelmed by law school, but you guys were like, yes, our agent is a lawyer. And at that time, there weren't too many agents that were lawyers or had a legal education. So you guys saw the asset that it could be in terms of representing you, and also just how, how much that would help me in my business and as an individual. So sometimes it's not always telling people what they want to hear, right? I think that's an important part of my job, and I think important part of friends and business partners is like, don't tell people what they want to hear. I think it's important to communicate respectfully, but if you disagree, let them know. And as long as they know it comes from love, then what can go wrong? It's just, hey, you can either use that advice or not. But at the end of the day, that person is sharing it with you in your best interest, or what they think is in your best interest, not to harm you.
So,
no, I couldn't agree more, man.
Howie, I know you've moved on now at this point. Meb, I'm sure you're still representing Meb. He's got tons of things going on, but you've expanded and you have other athletes, and some of them have had a lot of success. And I'm curious what it's been like to share in the success of all these new athletes on your roster. And then beyond that, how is everybody handling the situation now with the pandemic, and how has that affected you guys as your partnerships, your organization?
Yeah, no, great question. I think the first part is in terms of like growing the agency. We were very fortunate. I almost feel like the first 10 years of HAWI Management, I was a one-man operation from 2005 to 2014. And then in 2014, I started working with Leo Manzano. Pretty much soon after he won his silver medal, things just didn't work out with his previous agent and the circumstances. And he was without a sponsor for a year and a half. And I had seen Meb go through something similar. So I felt like I had a duty in the sport, right? To just have a conversation with Leo. Like, I had no intent or interest in representing him at that time, because I knew he had a representation. But, watching Meb struggle through that moment where he had just achieved winning the New York City Marathon, and a year later, he didn't have a footwear sponsor. I just wanted to let Leo know, like, hey, like, just keep your spirits up. If you perform, opportunities will present themselves. And we'd had a heart-to-heart conversation. And I actually recommended tell your agent to reach out to this shoe company, because I think this shoe company is on the verge of making a move. And that was it. It wasn't like, hey, let me do this for you. It was like, I respect the relationship you have. Please, recommend this. And then 2 weeks after that conversation, I realized a friend of mine told me, Leo's not only without a sponsor and without a coach, but now he doesn't have an agent. And we reached out to one another, and Leo said, would you represent me? And I said, you know what? In track and field, the business of track and field, unless you have a footwear sponsor at a pretty high level, it's not worthwhile from a business standpoint, right? And of course, like working with Leo is a dream, an Olympic silver medalist and a great person. But I said, unless I can bring something to the table that help sustain your career and mine, I don't want to make that commitment. And he gave me that opportunity to explore something. And it was with Hoka. I had built a great relationship with Jim Van Dyne and Angel Martinez at Decker's Outdoor Corporation. And they were very interested in Leo. And we were able to get that deal done very quickly. So this was like between February and April of 2014. And I was like, from a business standpoint, the two Olympic silver medalists on my roster, Leo and Meb. And I was like, wow, this business could be pretty lucrative if you have the right clients and the right deals. And so I was like on top of the world before the Boston Marathon in 2014. I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. And then all of a sudden, like 10 days later, Meb wins the Boston Marathon. So I think sometimes it's like, we always want more, right? Like we always want more of ourselves. We want more in our business, but I think sometimes it's good to say like, I'm thankful for these blessings I have in my life. Like it's human nature to want more. And it's good to be ambitious and have those goals, but it's also good to acknowledge like, my goodness, I never imagined to be in this position, in that case where it was like, representing both Meb and Leo at the same time, right? At that stage in their career. Because seriously, like for me, it's not just what medals you win and what kind of deals you have. Like I'm so blessed to work with amazing people like you, John, and Peter Gilmore, Stephen Shea, amazing athletes along the way that may not have won World Marathon majors, but good people that I still stay in touch with today. But that was a big breakthrough for the agency in 2014, not only signing Leo, but also signing Meb. And then that was a moment where I said, all right, because we knew Meb was going to get close to retirement. And I said, all right, I've got a few options. I can go into business with Meb, hopefully, if he lets me once again, or, I can get a corporate job, or I can build this agency. And I think that's when I decided to double down. And I said, at this time, I'm done being a one-man operation, because as much as I loved it, you get burned out trying to do everything by yourself. And so I realized like I needed to bring somebody on board. And at the beginning of 2015, I brought on John Rickey, who was the co-chair of the NYAC track and field program. And seriously, like that was a match made in heaven for our agency, because he was a perfect fit and helped. At that point, we had like maybe 5 clients. And he says, hey, Howie, after 1 year, he said, I think we can represent 20 to 25 athletes. I said, you're crazy. Because I was so used to like the one-on-one small group representation. I said, there's no way we can sustain that with 20 to 25 athletes. But John saw how we can kind of create some systems and just an approach to scale things so that we can still be very personable, but also a little bit more efficient. And so that was an amazing, like, if I did one thing right, it was bringing John on board at that time. And then in 2016, I got trigger happy, and there was a young man named Liam Fail that we worked on a lot of projects together. And I said, hey, Liam, I would love for you to join my team. And just because I wanted to make sure the infrastructure was set, right? Because I've seen a lot of agents and businesses where they're spread too thin because they're recruiting, they're doing a lot of like building the business, but they don't have the infrastructure to support it. And then people aren't satisfied because you're not taking care of your clients and your customers. So for me, I said, I'd rather overinvest in the infrastructure of the business. So then I could really go to any college athlete or any other athlete and say, we have the infrastructure and the team to support you. And I'm so glad I did that, because it took us a little bit of a while to kind of understand and master the recruiting process. And we're still far from mastering it. But that really helped, because I think once we had the infrastructure, people knew we weren't exclusive just to Meb. We had a lot of amazing athletes come to us. And, one of the first athletes to come to us was Alexi Pappas, Joe Kovacs, just amazing athletes that, heard good things about the agency, Boris Berrien. And so that was just such an honor. When you have a world champion like Joe Kovacs come and reach out and want to work, with your agency, it was just very flattering. And so, and by doing a good job, the word of mouth is the best advertisement. And we've had so many athletes come to us. And in 2018, we said, all right, we need to recruit out of college. And I think we started that in 2017, but we didn't do it right. we didn't really understand that process as well. But in 2018, we were able to land as a client, Couture Orji, Nikki Hills, and Alex Wright. And that was our biggest class in terms of signing, because most of those athletes beforehand had come to us from other agents, or they were veterans in the sport, like Leo Manzano and Joe Kovacs. So to be able to recruit out of college, that's where the most competition is. It was just, It was really amazing, and since then we've polished our recruiting process, and we've been able to land athletes like Rory Linkletter from BYU, amazing athlete who represents Canada. And just earlier this week, we announced one of our biggest signings out of college, Danny Jones. And I am, me and the team, we're so excited and honored to have her on our roster. And she's just an amazing athlete and a really good person, like everyone else on our roster, but she was definitely very sought after from a lot of other agents. And really having the team makes me confident that we can over deliver for Danny and all of our clients. If I didn't think we could deliver very well, I wouldn't even recruit, to be honest with you. I'd say, hey, let's get our house in order. Then we can go out there and recruit some of the best athletes. But I think we have a really good system, and that's thanks to the team and the athletes, right? The athletes can make your job harder or easier. And thankfully, because I think like-minded people attract to one another, we've had a great roster of athletes that just, it's a joy, it's an honor, and it's a pleasure to work with every single one of them.
So we're at about an hour. We like to ask guests, our company is named Go Be More. You've known us for a long time. You've known Jon forever. There's a good chance that you were one of the first people Jon ever talked to about this idea. I'd like to ask you, for you, when you hear the words "Go Be More," what does that mean to you? And what is your sort of, when you think of your own journey, what is your Go Be More journey that you're on right now?
Yeah. So when I think of Go Be More, and like you said, I was probably one of the first people that Jon shared this vision with, and man, he was as passionate about it then as he is now. And just to see, just like the agency, right? Like my agency is through ups and downs, and it's a journey, and the same thing. But sometimes, like when you have a great idea and a great vision, and it keeps reoccurring, and it just won't let go, you can't let go of it, it won't let go of you. That is like, I think there's a sense of purpose in that, right? And so I really see that with Go Be More. And I'm sure I've probably borrowed this exactly from you, Jon, but I remember, like, Go Be More is not just be more. It's like, go and do it now. So there's a sense of urgency, a sense of it's not just long-term and future and theoretical. It's more of action. And so I think that's what I see. And then it's, don't settle for less at the end of the day, right? Go be more than you think of yourself, and more of what other people may expect of you. And I think, testing your limits, pushing yourself. And I really think there's so much value in those three simple words, right? Like individually, those are some of the most common words in our language of English, put together. And then also, with the context that you guys have put around it, it's beautiful. Right. It is beautiful and powerful.
Thank you, Howie. Appreciate it, brother.
Yep.
Well said.
Yeah.
Well, I know we want to wrap this up and everything. And the only other thing I wanted to ask you, and then I hope will help us to kind of button up what's been an amazing conversation. Our message is so reflective of what you've described. I mean, to be honest with you, I know so much of the story, but to hear it again and to hear it from you today is extremely moving. And I just can't help it but think that when we tell people to chase your dreams and become what the world is chasing, that's something that your dad and your mom truly represent and instilled in you guys, because all of you are so successful, but so committed to being the very best that you could be. In your opinion, do you believe that having dreams are important and that everybody whatever those dreams that they may have is, that they should be chasing their dreams no matter what. Do you believe that that's that's a good philosophy to share with others? And
Yeah, absolutely.
based on what we're saying?
Yeah, I heard your speech, John, for the high school seniors, for example, right? And it is a powerful speech because we all have dreams. And sometimes we have wild, crazy dreams that are like, I think when a dream is reoccurring and that vision is reoccurring, then you're like, okay, this is meant for me, right? If it's just one time, just a wild dream, and you wake up and like, what's this all about? But if you're constantly having that dream, like, I want to do this for me or for my family or for my society, my community, for less fortunate people, whatever that dream and goal is, if you can really, if it's just speaking to you, right? Or you're speaking to it, like, you owe it to yourself to go chase it, right? And I think what happens, and I'm borrowing a lot from your speech because it is, I think, very accurate, is a lot of times we settle for less because sometimes we don't fully believe we can achieve that dream or that goal, or circumstances get in the way. But I think even if you don't achieve those goals and that dream, like, the pursuit of it will lead to certain things that are just amazing. Because for me, with this HAWI Management journey, like, who would have thought I would have been in this 15 years, right? You just never know what's around the corner, but you just take the step towards that goal, and then another, you kind of get to another fork in the road. But if you give up on your dream before you even start, then you're not being fair to yourself and you're not being fair to others. And I think it's easier to do that and chase that dream when you're young, when you have less to lose, in my opinion, right? Because I think sometimes when you have a big family, or you have a family and you have a mortgage and you have student loans, all these things, it doesn't mean you're not capable of chasing that dream, but there's a lot of other noise that makes it a little bit harder to pursue. And I think I've seen amazing people pursue their dreams, even at an older age and with a family and with a lot of obligations, but it's even more challenging then. And I know it's not easy when you're young and you don't have the sense of clarity and perspective, but I just say, if you can do it while you're young, or at least pursue it while you're young, it's going to direct you closer to what you're passionate about. And so I do believe we should chase our dreams. And, Jon and Bryan, you guys might know I'm a big Nipsey Hussle fan. He is such a motivating factor in my life through his music. And I didn't live the life that he lived, but there's a lot of wisdom in his messages. Just like Jay-Z, for me, there's a lot of wisdom. And one of the things that Nipsey says is, he says, there's large profit margins on long shots, right? Mm-hmm. So like the sure thing, it's kind of like it's nothing's for sure at the end of the day, but those things that are a little bit more guaranteed, they also have a little bit less upside. But if you really chase your dreams, if you do achieve it or achieve a fraction of it, the sense of purpose and satisfaction and fulfillment and whatever other profits come from it and benefits, that is priceless. So I just say, chase it and chase it responsibly. I think it's very important to make sure you put some constraints on it so that you understand, like, hey, this is my timeline, this is my goal, but you owe it to yourself to chase your dreams.
Thank you.
Love it, HAWI. Thank you so much, my brother, for sharing that, words of wisdom. Obviously, I mean, I'm excited to listen back to everything you've shared with us, because you're such a special person to me. You're such a special person to so many people, and we truly appreciate the opportunity to share this story now again and again and again through this interview with you. And I love you, man, from the bottom of my heart. Appreciate everything you did for me when I got to be one of your athletes, man. And I'm so glad that 15 years later, I can call you my brother, man.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jon. If I can say one thing, Bryan and Jon, in 2005, when I first started working with you, you started saying, HAWI, you're going to be the best in the world. You're going to be the best agent in the world. And Bryan, to your point where, sometimes people say things and it goes in one ear, out the other, or you don't really place a lot of significance to it. I remember those words, of course, but at that point I was like, man, I'm just trying to survive. I'm trying to take care of you, Jon. I'm trying to take care of Mev. I'm in survival mode. I'm not worried about being the greatest in the world. But those words I still remember that. And so sometimes like that encouragement, right? We can all have the power to encourage somebody. You know, if you believe in them, let them know you believe in them, because that can help them get to the next level.
Absolutely.
So Jon, you know, as much as I have done for you, you've done a lot for me. So thank you.
All right, I'm going to wrap it up here, guys. Thank you all for tuning in. You can find links to any articles or items we referenced in the show notes. Please subscribe and be sure to give us a rating. And remember to tell a friend about the show. The Go Be More podcast is produced by Go Be More Apparel. Check us out at gobemore.co. For all of us at Go Be More, we are what the world is chasing, and we hope this podcast helps you become what the world is chasing too.